I think it's once you know your value and people respond to that, heck, sign me up, right? I want to go in that direction and I want to be part of that. So I think there's a lot there that we can own no matter what level we're at.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Growth Hour, an interactive monthly event that features timely leadership topics and tools to grow your leadership performance. I'm your host, Daniel Stewart, executive consultant and coach and president of Stewart Leadership, a global consulting, coaching, and training firm aligning organizations on leadership, teaming change, and talent. In short, we develop the people side to enable your growth strategies. Today, I'm excited to be joined by two fantastic guests, both experts in performance goal setting and consultants and coaches here at Stewart Leadership, Kristin Derwinski and Kollmeyer. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Daniel. Really excited to be here.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm excited to be a part of this as well.
This is awesome. Thank you to both of you for joining here. Okay, now on to today's focus area. Creating aligned and engaging employee goals. When I say aligning employee goals, what are some of the first things that come to your mind? Good, bad, ugly. Aligning or aligned employee goals. What are some of the first things that come to your mind? Kristin, I'm going to go over to you first, and then over to Kitty. What are the things that come to your mind?
The first thing that comes is really the role of a senior leader. And what is their role, first of all, in defining the strategy? And then secondly, how are they translating that strategy and working with those that report to them to really translate that into goals? And how is that team then being clear? How are they thinking about how they're going to communicate those key messages from the top down so that as you think about the business goals, they start to cascade? And then as they become cascaded, how do we make sure that those goals are action-oriented? And there's steps that I can take from a team, but then from an individual perspective. And then how is that senior leader and their group collaborating on those goals and making sure there's progress? So what are those goals? What are the metrics? How are they following up and really making sure that there's progress across the organization? So that was a lot to answer that question, but there's a lot that senior leader really needs to lead and be part of.
I love it. Kitty, what are the things that come to your mind?
The first thing that came to my mind was partnership. And I think, yes, it is so, you bring up such great points, Kristin, that there is quite a sense of ownership that the senior leader has to take to ensure everybody is aligned. And then from there, instead of top-down goal setting, I like to see it as a partnership so that people are taking ownership and they're also creating their own goals in partnership because they are aligned, because they do understand the vision, they understand the long-term view, they understand how it relates to what they're doing in their work group. And so the first word that popped into my mind, Daniel, was partnership.
You've already introduced so many things that we can dive into here. This is fantastic. So starting at the top, Kristin, that's where you immediately went to. And then Kitty, you added this partnering idea. Let me toss out maybe a hard one. Is it a pipe dream? I mean, is it kind of something that is lovely in theory, but in reality, it ain't happening? Because you both are describing, yes, this is a wonderful thing. Does it actually happen? Is it possible to actually have aligned goals? Kitty?
I absolutely think it is. While many of us have been doing SMART goals for years and years and years, I'm a huge fan of FAST goals because of the F, frequently discussed. So we have frequently discussed, ambitious, specific. And the other thing that's super relevant today is the T, being that we're transparent so that you are sharing your goals with everybody. So there is a team focus on how to achieve versus this, I set a SMART goal at the beginning of the year. We don't look at it for a year. And that whole system to me is somewhat broken. I'm into when we're leading in the digital era with the pace of everything, we have to align, discuss, and pivot wherever we need to pivot. And so I think this idea of goal setting on an annual basis is something that I challenge. I don't know. Kristin, what are your thoughts as you hear me say that?
Complete agreement. I think we got to start somewhere, but then as the year evolves, how are we updating our goals? How are we talking about them frequently? How are we sharing those ideas across our functions so that we're not tripping up on metrics or we're not aligned with where the organization is going? And the best way to do that is exactly what you said, Kitty, around transparency. So the more that we are setting our goals, we're revisiting them and talking about them frequently, and then we're adjusting when we need to, it is possible. And I've seen a lot of organizations do it and do it well. And it really requires over communication. And I think you started, Kitty, with the word partnering. That's huge. And I think that's one of those keys.
So let's dive into this a little further. So on the one hand, we have this partnering idea, and we can come back to who and how that happens. The other part is what I was hearing is this idea of fast goals in contrast to SMART. Now, maybe not everybody's familiar with this concept. What I'm hearing, though, is the need to be able to, yes, develop SMART goals, but to make sure that they aren't just like unchanging and that they're done and they're set and we don't touch them, we don't really talk, we don't update. And instead, it's a mindset shift. Talk a little bit more about this mindset shift and why we need to then update them or talk about it more.
I think leadership has changed. The world has changed, leadership has changed, and we have generations that are stepping into leadership that were educated in a more collaborative environment and therefore enter the workforce thinking it will be more collaborative, less command and control, less top down, much more of a partnership, much more frequent discussions, much more groups and teams achieving together. And so the more we can continue to have open conversation, we're in an era where we're leading people, not just efficiently getting widgets through the system. So it's different. And some people are, I think, still hanging on to things that worked in the past that maybe want to move into the discomfort of thinking of a new leadership style and goal setting together, how we make significant progress toward achieving is different than it was.
As you're hearing this, Kristin, what's occurring to you?
Just to kind of build on what Kitty was saying is jobs have changed, right? There's a lot more specialization. There's a lot more around, I've got this piece, I have to understand the bigger picture. But with that also comes, it's interesting, right? You look at SMART goals and then you look at fast goals. And fast goals just feels like quicker. I don't know if it's the word versus SMART. I don't know what the difference is in one letter. I kind of did a pause a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about it, but I really think it comes with how are we frequently talking about it? Where if I go back, when I first started my career, we used to set our goals and set them on the shelf, and the business world didn't change as much. I could look at the end of the year and say, yeah, I did that. Where I feel like today, our life changes by the quarter. And so I can't think 360 days out, but I can think 120. And so if we're all kind of working together on that, that's where I feel like FAST really supports where the world of business is today. And also with the workforce. I think I heard a statistic, something around 80% of the workforce is going to be led by millennials very shortly, right? And so when we think about some of these statistics, there's some greatness and there's some really different ways of thinking that are important for us all to embrace.
It's interesting. I would love your thoughts on both of you. How do you then combat or address or challenge a mindset that is very accustomed to setting goals on an annual basis, and then next year we review them? That helps align because there's not going to be a lot of change during the year. In some ways, it makes alignment a little easier because there isn't the fluidity during the year. There isn't as much uncertainty. How do you shift that mindset and allow a person to then still embrace the alignment idea that it's still possible? Because otherwise, frustration can result. And being like, fine, I'm just going to tell you more what to do. instead of having a conversation. That can sometimes be a response instead of a more collaborative partnering. How do you help somebody remain open as they continue to change, especially as they think about this goal-setting process itself?
There's so many, we're talking about the difference of leading versus managing, aren't we? And we're not managing things. Any organization that's been around a decade and has 30 or more employees already has the things in place. After that, they're lacking leadership. It is so much more important to get things done through other people. And when other people are a part of the process, it's sort of a little contract together, isn't it? And whose ideas do people like the best? Their own. So if they're part of the process, there's a shared sense of ownership and this more frequent discussion. Setting and leaving it for a year, maybe there are a couple of businesses. There are so many disruptions in this world of business now. I don't know anybody untouched, and we have to be ready. And people have to be capable to look into other silos. IT might need to look at what HR is doing and say, how do I take that in this world, translate it into my work group, use some of the concepts they're applying, and possibly stretch our goal setting in a different way and kind of make everybody think differently. So it's the disruptions that I think are making this idea of sitting with a goal for a year, not having a partnership, those things are less relevant in today's world. And Kristin, what would you add to that?
I totally agree. And I think one place you could start is if you think about your KPIs or the specific metrics, how do you choose something that's a little bit more leading, right? So I think of a sales pipeline that can give me more information about sales, which might make me think a little bit different. Even if I have that more of that different mindset of I can set my goal for a year, if there's some metrics that are giving me some information, that could help influence me. If I think about specific leading indicators, I think that's one way. I also think it really is about how do we all think about challenging those folks and offering them one or two different things and really trying to influence and sharing our stories or sharing, hey, can we try? We'll keep to these goals, but can I just try this? And I think sometimes if we use those words, that helps us influence in a different way and go slow, not to the point of, so slow you're not moving, but how do you bring that individual along in a journey?
Yeah.
Fantastic thoughts here. Okay, so what if somebody really wants to align their goals and they're not necessarily the CEO of the company? They're not necessarily at a C-suite level. They're a middle manager, perhaps. They're an employee. Then they want to align. They want to make sure that what they're doing makes sense with other aspects of the organization, but they're just not getting the guidance that they need. What advice do you have for that employee, for that manager, for that director, for that supervisor? What can they do to be able to align their goals as best as possible if they are not necessarily given or a part of larger sets of goals for the company?
Would encourage people to start asking a lot of questions to get really clear on what the goals are. And some executives in C-suite are better at communicating it than others. And again, everything doesn't need to be top down. I tell people at any level of the organization, you are the organization. If you're working here, you're leading. So I think it is reasonable to get curious, ask the questions, reframe it back, and make sure you are clear, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's who can you reach out to? Who can provide you with the guidance? Is there a customer, or whether they're internal or external, that really receives the work or the service from your team or from you that can give you insight about what would make their lives better or what's really needed that supports where the organization is going? And Kitty, I love the word be curious and start to ask some of those questions.
That makes a lot of sense. And I often find that it's each person, to your point, Kitty, you are the organization. And what can you do to start? And then at least get somebody to react to something, because it's often easier to get a reaction versus simply saying, just fill this blank sheet of paper, please, because that can be hard. But what can you do to start the conversation? How can you initiate it in some way?
I also think each group has to be crystal clear on the unique value they bring to the organization. Because when we're collaborating, I hate to even use the word silos, but they exist. But we're working cross-functionally and we're engaged in work that isn't actually what our work group provides as unique value. So if a leader can get clear and aligned with their own group on what is our unique mandate, what do we bring to the table that is very specific, that our group is the only group that can bring this to the organization, goals flow pretty freely from there because it's so clear.
And people rally around that. They get excited. And that energy is what helps you get there. I think it's once you know your value and people respond to that, heck, sign me up, right? I want to go in that direction and I want to be part of that. So I think there's a lot there that we can own no matter what level we're at.
Heck, sign me up. I love it. Yes. It's kind of like, give me some clarity and then I can have something to get more excited about. I can position my energy around that. Okay, let's get specific, shall we? Let's dive into actually how does this work? So in the initial phase of setting goals, what does that look like? How many goals are we thinking about? What is a good type of goal? What's the content of these kinds of goals that you're seeing? Kristin, I'm going to go over to you. How does this start?
I think it starts with where Kitty was talking about what's the value of your team, but what's the work? What do you do? What's your contribution to your, why do you exist? And so it's taking that from a team perspective and then breaking that into what are the individuals on the team that support, hey, this is where we're going as a team. This is the value that we provide. And then on an individual basis, this is how I support that. I'm a big fan of 3 to 5 goals. Any more than that, you're not going to get it done. And I think those goals have to be very specific. They have to be something that has action and steps to it. They have to be stretching. They have to be not where I'm in my comfort zone, but help me stretch a little bit. And notice I said a little bit, because I think if we set unrealistic goals, then who cares? Why even bother? Right. So I think it's how do I stretch just enough? And then what's the timing? And because we really need to understand that. So again, it's having your team value, and then what do I do as an individual? And I think, Kitty, you said it really well, is at that point, me as an individual, I got to write my own, because then if I write them, I'm on board. They came from me. And I think that's a big motivational piece as well.
The number, I think, would be dictated by what individually as an organization your work group is held accountable to. So if there are metrics that are non-negotiable, there may need to be some goal setting. But I like to look at it in 2 buckets. The first one is, what am I doing? What am I accountable to? And then I think a huge part of goal setting should be the how. What is my style? What are the soft skills? And what are the goals around that? And lean into one strength and pick maybe one opportunity. And it may not be your biggest opportunity. I'm not a fan of working on weaknesses all year long, because probably not going to become a strength. You probably don't like doing it either. And while we have to neutralize weaknesses, I'm a huge fan of taking something that you're good at, but maybe it would give you significantly different influence and impact if you got to be amazing at that one thing. So picking some goals around what I do, but then 1 or 2 goals around how I get it done is so important to team dynamics. And some organizations miss that.
That's well said. As we're continuing to talk here, I'd love to go to our listeners, and I want to ask all of the listeners a question. And the question is, are you in an organization that has aligned goals? Do you have aligned goals? And you could answer in one of 3 ways. Yes, I have aligned goals. We have aligned goals here. Or the other response is, we're working on it. We're kind of in the middle. Or the third response would be, no, we do not. And I'd love to see some responses from folks. Do you have aligned goals? Or are you working on it? Or no, we don't. Just to kind of get a feel and a flavor of how frequently is this? And this may fluctuate each year. So we're talking about the number of goals here, 3 to 5. But the point is not so much the number, it's what matters for the organization. What's the value you're adding? What do you need to pay attention to? What do you need to be then held accountable to? And then also, Kitty, you said something interesting. You said the what and the how.
Mhm.
So let's talk for a moment as people can then reply in terms of how aligned they are within their organization. The nature of goals, because oftentimes we think of goals as what do we need to accomplish, the what. Share a little bit more in terms of what the how kind of goal might look like. What are some examples? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's the culture pieces, right? The values. Am I living the values of the organization? I mean, it could be as simple as collaboration. Am I a cooperative team player who can work together cross-functionally and disrupt the thought process without being disruptive? It could be anything. That's just one, but all the culture elements, and sometimes they shift. And if we really mean it, that these are culture elements, when we set the culture and the values of the organization in combination with vision or mission, or however you choose to do it in your own organization, then these pieces become very important. I'm working with an organization right now where the CEO has been there just over a year and made the review 50-50. 50% of your performance review is against the culture, and 50% is the what you actually accomplish. And this has been a really interesting, controversial, and difficult journey for some, and some are thrilled.
Mm.
You know, Kitty, as I hear you say the what and the how, I just think of what I see a lot of organizations is, okay, here's my performance goals, and then here's my development goals. And sometimes my development goals align with my values or my cultural attributes or whatever they may be. And sometimes it doesn't. But what I love about what you're saying is, okay, I have my performance, I have the what, now it's how I do the what. And I just think of, as a manager or a leader, the ability to provide that instant feedback. It just feels like a great mechanism to use that sort of format, relating it back to the goals, creating more of the why behind the how, right? And more of that behavior change, because I can probably see a more direct alignment there. And really kind of supporting why organizations have the values, and really kind of bringing that whole piece home. So I really like that format to help people think about goal setting a little differently. So thanks for sharing. I think that's a great approach.
And you just brought up feedback, which we could do a 3-hour session on feedback.
Yes, we could.
Yes.
That's the part I don't like about setting goals in the beginning of the year and not revisiting them for a year, because we owe people feedback all the time about behavior we see and what is the impact of it, either positive or not so much.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And then what do we do about that? And those conversations need to happen. Then we can reset goals right then and there.
Absolutely.
You know, it's interesting looking at a few of these responses that have come in. They span the spectrum of a few that are, yes, aligned, and then a few, we're working on it. And I just know there are stories behind that statement. We are working on it. As every organization is on a different trajectory. And now let's continue this conversation, because even if an organization is aligned at the beginning, they may have 3 to 5 goals. They can do the what and the how. It's clarified. It's from the top. It's partnered. Imagine that's happened. Now, let's walk through what the heck the rest of the year really looks like for this manager, for this leader, to then have engaging conversations. Walk me through what could happen daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, instead of simply the 12-month later self-appraisal and review. What should be happening in between? Give me some examples. Paint a picture in the day in the life of, if you don't mind. Who wants to jump in on this one here?
I can do that. I think the good news is there are a lot of digital solutions to help people, number one, track where they're going, right? And that can be accessed by anybody at any point, depending upon privacy settings. But I think the other piece is, how do you then build in the communication between that individual and their team, and the individual and their manager? And so what does that conversation look like, that they're really talking about the goals on a frequent basis? And that serves as their method for setting priority, for getting work done. It helps them figure out their day and their week and their month. And if that's not the right work, then how do they think about adjusting those goals? And then how does that manager then make sure that they're communicating across the organization? Or those individuals, how are they communicating with their peers so that the work stays aligned? I think it comes down to partnering and over communicating and making sure that people continue to focus on the right things.
And something you said, Kristin, made me think right away. You said prioritization. In this ever-changing world, in this pace that is moving so quickly, there are so many people that I will ask, are you running the days and the weeks, or the days and the weeks running you? So this, all of a sudden, something comes and now we have to do this, and something has to give. Our plate is already full, so that it's this renegotiation, reprioritization, and realignment of what we're doing, at what pace, and with whom, because we have to make sure that leaders of the organization are not only working on the most important work every single day, but their team sees them, hears them talking about the most important work instead of trying to just get everything done as quickly as possible, because longer, faster, harder, stronger is not scalable. And so the idea of reprioritizing all the time and the idea of a strategic no, fast failure, all this goes in with to renegotiation of my goals. And what was relevant a month ago may not be relevant. Things were already moving quickly before the pandemic, but the digital disruption now is unbelievable. And yet I'll come back to, as the world is moving more quickly, there is nothing about an adult human being that has changed anywhere in the world. So we need to slow down, renegotiate all of our goals, what we're working on, and how we're working on it every single day. So that this idea of slow down to speed up through just what you said, really great communication, two-way communication.
You know, it reminds me of, I was talking with a group and one individual shared that she and her manager actually meet weekly, and they go through all of the priorities and they cover the goals and they get shifted around. And if in the middle of the week something happens, she has the right to challenge him and he has the right to challenge her on where they should prioritize and what gets put off to the side. And so I think that's one of the key pieces of how do we make sure we're all understand where we're focused and what those goals look like. And we have to have that two-way dialogue, because we don't know everything. And those two different heads are in two different places in the organization hearing different information, right? And so when they come together, they can renegotiate and they can figure out what's best for the business then and the partners that you work with.
One of the assumptions that kind of flies in the face of what we're talking about, so I want to get your reaction to this, is the assumption that a leader, a manager, should know. They should know the priorities so that they can convey that. And so let's imagine a scenario. Kitty, imagine you're on my team. You report to me. I'm your manager. Lots of change is happening. You come to me and say, all right, these were the goals that were set several months ago. Things have clearly shifted. What do I focus on now? What do I prioritize? I, as your manager, may have no idea, because it is changing just as much for me. And I'm trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing. And I go to my boss and they don't have any idea.
Right.
At what point does the leader, how do they react to this versus continually say, well, I don't know, or I'm going to make up, all sorts of reactions. How does a leader respond in this situation?
Of course, it's situational. However, this is a big part of leading transformation versus change, isn't it? Because you're leading toward what is a more blurry future. And we're pivoting all the time. And so some things are less clear. I think it goes back to communication and alignment. And are we clear on what our work is as a team and how we contribute to the long-term view? What are the milestones that we back up to? And I think being comfortable with ambiguity is part of being a leader and a worker today at any level. So we have to be comfortable to lead in uncertainty Some people are informed by data. Some people are super intuitive. Sometimes we have to ask for data that doesn't even exist today to help us make those decisions. So I think, that is, wow, we pop the top off big stuff, because you could have a huge conversation about how your organizational culture supports things like this. And I think that would be very different for every organization. But it is leading in uncertain times, and it is making your best guess, which then brings up, what is our relationship as an organization, me as a leader, to risk and failure?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm leading $1 million project and $400,000 in, it's very clear that I need to back out of this strategy. How does the organization view that? Do they say, I saved us $600,000? Or do they say, you just made a $400,000 error? That's not okay. So there are some cultural components that inform some of those conversations and decisions.
Kristin, what would you like to add on this one?
I think the biggest thing I would add is, if I'm that manager and we're trying to figure out the priorities, how are we asking questions and being curious to get to exactly what's happening? And then how do I work with my direct reporter? How do we work together to figure out what the right solution is? And again, that's that partnership, and that's that really strong relationship. And then also saying, who else do we need to talk with? And where do we need to find some additional answers if we feel like we don't have enough? But it's really being open and being curious about what's happening, and then working together to find that solution.
What I'm so enjoying the comments here is not just the tactical approaches, the more frequent interaction, the more frequent conversations, the openness, but there is a shift in a leader's mindset that needs to happen at the same time to enable these conversations to be as effective and productive as one needs them to be. And this mindset needs to be laced with a sense of learning in a way that maybe has never existed before, and the ability to learn in a quick fashion, and to be continually vulnerable and recognize that I may not have the answers, and to set that as an expectation, which is okay. And let's figure this out together. And this is what we know today. And now let's figure out, based on this, what's the next step? Not the 15 steps out through the next several. What's the next step? And let's keep learning as we go. That is a mindset shift that is critical to connect then the tactical pieces. So key.
There are a lot of younger leaders who have not been, because everything's so quick, it becomes do it. And we have a ton of executors out there and not a lot of strategists. And so the idea of broad scanning, reading, and reading not just about your own industry and what are the things that are impacting it, but what's just going on in the world, so that you can make ties and predictions. And that will also then help inform, what do we do when? Because you have this, sort of diverse group of thought based on people that are well-informed rather than executing. But that is another slow down to speed up.
That's a great point. I'm seeing a great question here coming in, is around the stakeholders, because the folks that you make a goal with at the beginning may not be the actual same people that you're delivering that goal to, especially in a matrixed organization or as things kind of shift. How do you anticipate? How do you manage that? Because the actual customers may be different, especially if you have two bosses, for example. How do you manage and negotiate all of these kind of stakeholders in various parts of this aligning process? What advice would you have?
I think the advice is communicate and share, hey, this is where we are. This is what we're thinking for goals. What do you think? What would you add to it? What would you take away? What would be some metrics? Can you share your goals? And are we aligned? And do that frequently. And if you find yourself adjusting, which you will, how are you then sharing that with your stakeholders and saying, this is where we're finding ourselves? Because more than likely, they're finding themselves in that position as well. And they're thankful that you're anticipating it or you're ahead of it. So I think it's really about sharing it and sharing it frequently.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. That's the first thing that came up for me, just that transparency and openness. And we need to stay connected.
Absolutely.
When we're working with leaders, it is a so busy and we become heads down and just working in a microscope when we're missing the binocular view that comes from interacting with these stakeholders on a regular basis. And the more we're communicating, the more well-connected we are, the better conversations we can have about renegotiating priorities, discussing how this ties to our goal. Is it time to change that goal and pivot? Short term, how comfortable are we with risk? If we pivot this way, these are some predictions I can make. Are you comfortable with moving forward this way? Because the payoff could be big and the failure could be big. Yeah. And we could then pivot quickly again. But if we're not comfortable making these connections and being visible within our organization, especially when Tom brings up this, idea of all these different stakeholders, how well connected are you? How well do you understand how they think and what is on their mind and what their priorities are? That will inform a lot. That comes back to how you are owning and setting your own goals and your own work group. If you're leading a larger group or if you're leading other leaders, that helps you. The more everybody understands, then the better decisions they can make at every level of the organization, right?
Mm-hmm. And, I just want to add is you hear this and you think, oh my gosh, how am I going to find the time? Right? That sounds like you're adding to my plate and you're adding to my workload. And I feel like if you have some of those initial conversations, if there's a way to save this information or share it asynchronously where people can look at it and you can refer to it, or you change the content of your meetings, you can get there, but it's being very intentional about when you're communicating it, how you're communicating it, and bringing everybody on board. And I think it's if you take that 5 to 15 minute pause and just think about that, it will go a long way and you won't feel as overwhelmed. It's maximizing those meetings and maximizing some of those digital tools that are there to help us. And it can be as easy as, hey, I adjusted this goal by 10%. Here's why. Come see me, right? If you have that really strong relationship. If you don't, maybe it is a 10-minute phone call, but whatever that may be, but it's just being very intentional about how you go about those changes and what tools you use.
Mm-hmm.
I love how you mentioned the reaction that we can all have, even listening to our conversation, because people could say, what? I have to do all of this even more? Or this is going to take so much time. And I guess I personally have two reactions. One is, yes, there is a lot on people's plates already. Absolutely. And the second reaction is, this is what a leader does. This is the leader work. And it is first and foremost clarifying expectations, setting standards, and providing clarity around priorities. That is leader work. And for us to all get into the mindset that as we identify ourselves as a leader, as a manager, that is what leader work looks like. It is having these conversations. It is negotiating. It is prioritizing. It is being fluid and learning. And it's not just an add-on built on, it is the work. And so that, again, is this mindset that we all struggle with for very logical reasons because we all have so much going on. But that is the leader work that we have to prioritize for ourselves as leaders as well.
I love that you bring up the mindset. It's about how am I showing up every day? Who am I being? Who is my work group being? Who is my organization being? Not what are we doing? Who are we being? And that will inform our approach. And of course, in executive coaching, this is what we talk about all the time. How are we showing up? Not what are we doing? I don't know how to run a manufacturing plant, but I can talk about how we show up as leaders. And that is mindset first, every day, all day.
Yeah, that's well said. Okay, folks. So as we're beginning to wrap up here, because I always want to give people a few minutes as they're going between meetings, here's the question for each of you. We've talked about so many great ideas here. What's the one thing that you want to leave with listeners here to be able to help them create aligned goals for themselves within the organization? What's the one thing that you want to leave with them? Who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sit down frequently, clarify together. Well, that's more than one thing, but it's all part of the sitting down.
The sitting down, that's big.
Prioritize,
yes.
Make sure you're aligned, before you leave.
Yeah, well said. Please, Kristin, what would you say? What's the one thing that you would really encourage leaders to do?
I think it's really about partner to set the goals and then provide frequent feedback. And that feedback should be positive and it should be constructive. And again, as frequently, it shouldn't be thanks for showing up today, but it should be about what's the work that they're contributing and how are they adding value to the organization, and where do they need to continue to grow and to set that environment.
I love it. I love it. Kitty, Kristin, thank you for being a part of Leadership Growth Hour today.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Please visit stewartleadership.com/events to stay up to date on future podcasts, as well as to listen to past episodes. We'd love to have you subscribe and join us in the future. Till next time, take care, everyone. Thanks again to Kristin and Kitty. All the best.